The first rays of dawn sliced through the pre-dawn stillness, painting the New Mexico desert in hues of ancient gold and bruised purple. It was a vast, unforgiving canvas, stretching infinitely towards a horizon that promised little but more of the same rugged, relentless beauty. Canyons carved by millennia of wind and water snaked through the landscape, their shadows still deep and cool. The air, thin and sharp, carried the scent of dry earth and distant juniper. Then a subtle rhythm broke the profound silence, the rhythmic thudding of hooves, soft at first, growing steadily clearer. It was an intrusion, yet also an inherent part of this wild land, a sound that spoke of survival and endurance, foreshadowing a discovery that would irrevocably alter a man's silent world. Elijah Brooks, a man whose face was etched with the same lines as the ancient arroyos he rode through, navigated the familiar terrain with the quiet confidence of someone deeply intertwined with his surroundings. His hat, faded from countless sunrises, shadowed eyes that missed nothing. A weathered denim jacket, patched in places, draped over a frame lean and sinewy, hardened by years of solitary labor. He was a cowboy, not of the romanticized silver screen, but of the dust and grit, his life a testament to quiet solitude and unceasing hard work. His horse, an equally seasoned sorrel mare named Dusty, moved with an easy gait, her hooves kicking up clouds of fine red dust that shimmered briefly in the nascent light. Elijah and Dusty were a single integrated entity, moving as one with the vast, indifferent desert. His gaze, constantly scanning, halted abruptly. Far off, near a cluster of skeletal ocotillo, he saw it. A dark, impossibly small silhouette against the growing light. He'd seen plenty of mirages in his time, but this one held a static quality, an undeniable stillness that spoke of something tangible, something wrong. He spurred Dusty forward, the urgency a silent command passing between rider and horse. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a tiny, frail figure. A colt, barely more than a bundle of bones and matted fur, lying collapsed in the sand. It moved feebly, a weak twitch of a leg, a barely perceptible lift of its head, before succumbing again to the earth. Elijah's gut twisted. He knew the desert's brutal arithmetic: weakness equaled death. Yet, the sight of such raw vulnerability, so utterly helpless, stirred a deep, unwavering concern within him. He was no stranger to loss, to the harsh realities of the wild, but this was different. His mind, accustomed to practicalities, immediately catalogued the logistical nightmare: the distance to his ranch, the colt's apparent dehydration, the lack of resources out here. It was a dying animal, a lost cause by all rational measures. The desert offered no second chances. But then, another voice, quieter yet more persistent, spoke. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much struggle, who understood the fine line between living and dying, and who possessed an ingrained, almost primal, need to alleviate suffering when he could. The internal debate was swift, a fleeting conflict between seasoned pragmatism and profound moral imperative. The colt was suffering, and Elijah Brooks was there. Before we see what Elijah does next, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We bring you inspiring stories of resilience and unexpected discoveries from the most remote corners of the world. The sight of the small, struggling colt had ignited a spark in Elijah that transcended mere rancher pragmatism. His initial hesitation, born of decades spent grappling with the stark realities of desert survival, quickly dissolved into a firm resolve. He couldn't leave it to perish. Not when there was even the slimmest chance of intervention. The harsh lessons of the land had taught him self-reliance and resilience, but they had also etched a deep respect for life into his soul. His empathy, a quiet undercurrent beneath his gruff exterior, now surged to the forefront, overriding the logical voice that whispered of wasted time and effort. This was more than just another animal. It was a desperate plea from the wilderness itself. He dismounted slowly, speaking in low, reassuring tones to his own steady mare, who seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. Approaching the colt was a painstaking endeavor. It was terrified, its eyes wide with a combination of fear and exhaustion, its frail body trembling. Each step Elijah took was measured, deliberate, designed to convey peace rather than threat. He moved with the quiet grace of a predator, yet with the gentle intent of a healer. Finally, he got close enough to see the raw sores on its legs, the sunken flanks, the dullness of its once bright coat. It was severely dehydrated, its breath shallow and uneven. Carefully, Elijah produced a collapsible bucket and a water skin from his saddlebag. He poured a small amount of precious water, offering it slowly. The colt hesitated, then, driven by an instinct for survival stronger than its fear, tentatively lowered its head, lapping at the life-giving liquid in small, desperate gulps. Elijah knelt beside it, his large calloused hand gently stroking its matted mane, feeling the sharp contours of its spine beneath the thin skin. He applied a makeshift salve to its wounds, whispering soft words of comfort, a balm for both the animal and his own troubled spirit. Transporting the colt back to the ranch was an arduous journey, stretching the limits of both Elijah and his mare. The small creature was too weak to walk far and too heavy to simply carry. Elijah fashioned a travois from some spare rope and a tarp he always carried, improvising a crude stretcher that could be dragged behind his horse. It was slow, agonizing progress over the uneven, rock-strewn terrain. The sun climbed higher, relentless, beating down on them. Dust rose with every step, coating their skin and fur. Each mile felt like 10, but Elijah's determination never wavered. He paused frequently, offering sips of water, checking on the colt's fragile state, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. During one such pause, as he watched the colt weakly try to push itself up, a name came to him. "Spirit," he murmured, the word tasting right on his tongue. It captured the colt's tenacity, its inherent wildness, even in this state of abject vulnerability. It was a temporary name, he told himself, practical for calling out, but it quickly became more than that. It was an acknowledgement of the untamed essence he felt, emanating from the small creature, a spark of the majestic wild mustangs that once roamed these plains freely. As the hours bled into a long, grueling afternoon, a nascent connection began to form. The colt, Spirit, no longer flinched as violently at Elijah's touch. It would whicker softly when he spoke, its large, intelligent eyes occasionally meeting his with a flicker of what almost seemed like trust. Elijah, in turn, found himself speaking more to the colt than to his own horse, sharing unspoken thoughts and pouring his quiet strength into the fragile being. The desert, usually a place of stark solitude, now held the silent, determined companionship of a gruff cowboy and his unexpected, precious cargo. They pressed on, the distant silhouette of Elijah's ranch a beacon of hope against the deepening twilight. The weary arrival at Elijah's sprawling yet sparsely populated ranch was a silent testament to the arduous desert journey. Spirit, still largely a bundle of bones and matted fur, swayed precariously in the makeshift sling Elijah had fashioned, supported by his sturdy horse. The sun dipped below the distant mesas, casting long purple shadows across the dusty corrals, where a few scruffy cattle lowed softly. There were no ranch hands to greet them, no welcoming faces. Elijah preferred his solitude, his work a quiet communion with the land. He unburdened the colt with practiced tender movements, leading his own exhausted horse to water before turning his full attention to the fragile creature, now shivering in the cool evening air. Elijah immediately set about providing what crude medical attention he could muster. He meticulously cleaned the colt's scrapes and cuts with antiseptic, grimacing at the raw patches beneath the grime. Water, offered in a shallow trough, was refused at first, then lapped tentatively with a dry, rasping tongue. He mixed a gruel of softened oats and warm milk, coaxing the colt to take small, hesitant sips. The challenges were immense. He was no veterinarian, and his remote location meant specialized care was a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet, his hands moved with an innate gentleness, a deep-seated instinct to nurture that belied his rugged exterior. He bedded Spirit down in a sheltered stall, thick with fresh straw, and spent most of the night simply watching, a silent vigil under the vast, star-strewn sky. The first few days at the ranch blurred into a cycle of constant care and anxious observation. Spirit's recovery was excruciatingly slow, measured in imperceptible increments. A flicker of interest in the oats, a slightly less shaky gait when it attempted to stand, the subtle shift from fear to a tentative acceptance of Elijah's presence. Each small victory, like the colt managing to drink a full bucket of water on its own, sent a quiet wave of relief through Elijah. He spoke softly to the animal, his voice a low rumble that seemed to soothe its frayed nerves, sharing bits of his day, the weather, the tasks ahead. It was during these intimate moments that Elijah began to notice peculiarities about the colt. Its coat, once caked with desert dust, slowly revealed a striking, almost iridescent shimmer in the morning light. The markings on its face and legs were unlike any he'd seen on common wild horses, or even the ranch stock he'd encountered over decades. There was a delicate refinement to its bone structure, a proud set to its head even in its weakened state. These observations were subtle at first, mere curiosities that he catalogued in his mind, attributing them perhaps to its unique experience of abandonment and survival. Yet a persistent hum of something more significant began to stir within him. How had such a distinct-looking young animal, with features that seemed almost sculpted, ended up so desolate and alone in the unforgiving expanse of the desert? It posed a quiet mystery, a question that scratched at the edges of Elijah's practical, no-nonsense mind. He found himself studying Spirit's evolving form, tracing the elegant lines of its muscular development, its bright, intelligent eyes. There was a wild grace about it, an untamed beauty slowly emerging from beneath the scars and weakness. Elijah knew many things about horses, but this one, this particular colt, felt different. It was the stirrings of a revelation, a growing curiosity about Spirit's lineage, and how it might be more than just an ordinary wild horse. The quiet, isolated rhythm of Elijah's ranch, usually as predictable as the sunrise, began to subtly shift. News of his desert rescue, though he hadn't purposefully spread it, had a way of filtering through the sparse communities of the New Mexico high desert. A trip to the nearest general store for feed and medical supplies, a brief, guarded conversation with the proprietor about the new colt was all it took. Whispers travel fast in places where life moves slow, and soon the tale of the cowboy finding a starving animal out in the scorching heat started to circulate. It wasn't long before those whispers reached ears beyond the immediate vicinity. The first inquiries came in a casual, almost roundabout manner. Old Man Hemlock, a retired veterinarian from the next county over, who still made house calls for old time's sake and a good flask of whiskey, heard about it. He pulled up to Elijah's gate one dusty afternoon, ostensibly to check on one of Elijah's older mares, but his eyes kept drifting towards the lean-to, where Spirit now spent its days, gaining strength. He spent a good hour watching the colt, his brow furrowed in a thoughtful, almost perplexed expression. "That's a fine-looking creature, Elijah," he drawled, his voice slow and deliberate. "Got some markings I ain't seen in a while." His words were vague, but the undercurrent of seasoned observation was clear. Other horse enthusiasts, or those who simply enjoyed local gossip, occasionally stopped by, feigning interest in buying a saddle or discussing cattle prices, but their true gaze was always directed at Spirit. It was during one such visit that the MUSTANG whisper first truly took root. A young woman, new to the area, who worked with a regional equine rescue, dropped by with a batch of donated blankets. She possessed an enthusiast's keen eye and a passion for desert conservation. As she watched Spirit tentatively trot around the small paddock, a gasp escaped her lips. "Elijah," she breathed, her voice filled with a reverence that Elijah found slightly unsettling. "Have you considered, could this be a wild Mustang? Not just any, but it looks like one of the Kiger Barnes line." The phrase hung in the air, foreign and weighty, carrying with it implications Elijah hadn't considered. Kiger Barnes? Protected herd? The words were new to him, but the way she spoke of them, hushed and awestruck, suggested immense significance. Elijah, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed these claims with a wave of his calloused hand. His focus remained squarely on Spirit's recovery. He was a rancher, not an academic interested in breed lineages or historical significance. "It's just a desert horse, ma'am. Found it starving," he'd gruffly reply, redirecting the conversation to the immediate, tangible needs of the animal. Its feed, its fresh water, the gradual healing of its wounds. The idea of rare or protected felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the day-to-day realities of keeping the young colt alive and healthy. He remained grounded in the practicalities, in the dirt beneath his boots, and the tangible results of his tireless care. However, the young woman was persistent and, perhaps, a little cunning. Before she left that day, after praising Spirit's resilience and Elijah's kindness, she pulled out a small, unobtrusive smartphone. "Mind if I just take a quick picture for our records, Elijah, to show the progress?" she asked innocently enough. Elijah, distracted by a stubborn fence post he was trying to mend, waved a hand dismissively. "Sure, go right ahead." The click was barely audible, a fleeting moment that would soon become a pivotal turning point. That single photograph, taken without Elijah's full understanding of its potential reach, soon began to circulate more widely. It traveled beyond the local rumor mill, across social media groups dedicated to equine preservation, and into the inboxes of horse communities far and wide. The image of the striking, uniquely marked colt, set against the rustic backdrop of Elijah's ranch, now sparked a firestorm of speculation, igniting an interest that would soon engulf Elijah's simple, solitary world. The whisper was no longer a whisper. It was a growing chorus. The humble photograph, initially dismissed as a trifling curiosity, swiftly outgrew its digital confines, circulating with an astonishing velocity amongst specialized equestrian forums and conservation communities. What began as whispers soon escalated into a resounding chorus of informed speculation. Spirit, now visibly recovering and growing stronger under Elijah's diligent care, presented a dazzling spectacle. Its unique features, once faint glimpses beneath the grime, now shone with undeniable clarity. The iridescence of its coat, the distinctive markings, and the pronounced refinement of its physique captivated attention far beyond the dusty trails of New Mexico. Regional horse associations, deeply invested in the preservation of rare breeds, and historical societies dedicated to documenting the lineage of America's wild horses, began to focus an almost laser-like interest on the colt at Elijah's remote ranch. The local veterinarian, who had initially brushed off the inquiries, now found himself fielding calls from prominent equine geneticists and conservationists, each one expressing an urgent desire to examine the creature. This mounting wave of interest culminated in the arrival of Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned expert in wild Mustang genetics, whose reputation preceded him even in the isolated world of Elijah's ranch. Dr. Thorne, a woman with keen, discerning eyes and a quiet, authoritative demeanor, spent hours meticulously observing Spirit. She examined its teeth, measured its proportions, carefully documented the unique whorls in its coat, and even collected hair samples for genetic analysis. Her movements were precise, respectful, and deeply informed. When she finally confirmed her findings, her voice was hushed, almost reverent. Spirit, she explained, was not merely a wild Mustang. It was a purebred descendant of a specific, incredibly rare lineage, a heritage thought to be all but lost to time and the relentless pressures of development. The delicate bone structure, the specific coloration, even the subtle nuances of its gait, all pointed to an ancient, untainted bloodline, making Spirit an invaluable genetic bridge to a dwindling, cherished wild herd. Elijah, standing beside Dr. Thorne in the familiar dust of his corral, was utterly overwhelmed by the revelation. He struggled to reconcile the fragile, near-death colt he had painstakingly nursed back to health with the significant, almost mythical creature Dr. Thorne described. The animal he had simply tried to save from a desert demise was suddenly burdened with an immense historical and genetic weight. It felt surreal, like a tale plucked from one of the worn storybooks he occasionally read by lamplight. His practical, grounded world, defined by the tangible realities of ranching and survival, felt suddenly turned on its head. The simple act of compassion had unearthed something far more profound than he could have ever imagined. Dr. Thorne elaborated on Spirit's value. This particular Mustang lineage held a critical place in both genetic diversity and historical significance. It represented a direct link to the herds that once roamed freely across vast swathes of the American West, embodying an unbroken connection to a wild past. Its genes carried the blueprint of resilience, adaptation, and an untamed spirit that was rapidly disappearing. Spirit wasn't just a horse, it was a living historical document, a testament to an endangered heritage. Its survival was a miracle, a precious thread in the rich tapestry of American wildlife. However, this extraordinary discovery quickly began to cast a long shadow over Elijah's quiet life. The news, fueled by Dr. Thorne's official confirmation and the relentless spread of images, transformed his remote ranch into an unexpected focal point. The mounting pressure was palpable. Researchers wanted to study spirit, conservationists yearned to protect its lineage, and more ominously, collectors with deep pockets and an insatiable desire for exclusivity began to make inquiries. Environmental authorities, previously unaware of the desert's hidden gem, suddenly began to take keen notice, their interest tinged with the bureaucratic weight of regulations and potential interventions. Elijah, the solitary cowboy, found his peaceful existence irrevocably altered, caught in a swirling vortex of attention, each current pulling at the fate of the unique Mustang he had saved. The quiet solitude Elijah had always cherished at his remote ranch was suddenly, unceremoniously shattered. What began as a trickle of curious locals, drawn by whispers of the rescued colt, quickly swelled into a veritable stream of visitors. Reporters, their cameras flashing, descended like vultures, their incessant questions grating against his weathered patience. Officials, cloaked in the sterile authority of various agencies, arrived in sleek, unnatural vehicles, their clipboards and legal jargon alien to the dust and honest labor of the ranch. The air, once filled only with the rustle of wind and the lowing of cattle, now buzzed with human voices, an unwelcome cacophony that felt like an invasion. Spirit, though recovering remarkably, became a spectacle, its every movement scrutinized, every glance met with the expectant gaze of outsiders who saw not a rescued animal, but a prize. Conflicting interests immediately began to coalesce around the majestic young Mustang. Some, genuinely moved by its story and beauty, spoke passionately of protecting it, of ensuring its future in a wild, natural setting. Others, with a more academic bent, saw a research opportunity, an invaluable specimen for study and genetic preservation. Then there were the insidious whispers, the outright propositions, from those who viewed spirit purely as a commodity, a rare, exotic addition to a private collection, a symbol of status and wealth. Elijah listened to it all, his gaze hardening with each passing day. He had scooped a near-dead creature from the desert, nursed it back to health with his own hands, and forged a silent, unbreakable bond with its defiant spirit. He wasn't about to simply hand it over, not to well-meaning scientists, not to ambitious bureaucrats, and certainly not to avaricious collectors. His resolve solidified, a granite wall against the encroaching tide of external demands. He was spirit's protector, and that responsibility was not negotiable. The true turning point in this escalating drama came with the arrival of the federal agents. Two stern-faced individuals, clad in uniforms that spoke of distant authority, materialized one brisk morning. They introduced themselves as representatives from the Bureau of Land Management, asserting their jurisdiction over wild Mustangs, especially those of a confirmed, protected lineage. Their tone was polite but firm, their language laced with regulations and statutes that made Elijah's head spin. They spoke of the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, of herd management areas, and of genetically significant individuals. They implied, rather than stated directly, that spirit, as a federal asset, was not Elijah's to keep. This marked the true beginning of a legal quagmire, a bureaucratic labyrinth that Elijah, a man of the land, was ill-equipped to navigate. The simple act of saving a life had unexpectedly entangled him in a complex web of laws, property rights, and conservation mandates. The federal agents explained that while they commended his humanitarian efforts, Spirit's status as a purebred Mustang from a dwindling, protected line meant its future was not a matter for individual decision, but for federal policy. They presented him with forms, deadlines, and the ominous prospect of legal action if he resisted. Elijah felt a deep, unfamiliar weariness settle in his bones, a feeling far more profound than any physical exhaustion from ranch work. He understood the gravity of the situation now. His quiet life, his simple act of kindness, had unknowingly plunged him into a battle far larger than himself, one where the fate of a magnificent creature hung in the balance, caught between the desert dust and the cold, unfeeling machinery of government and greed. The news of Elijah's predicament, initially circulating as whispers among the ranching community, rapidly escalated into a full-blown local cause. What began as idle curiosity about the grizzled cowboy and his rare find transformed into a groundswell of support. The townsfolk, a tight-knit community accustomed to the harsh realities of desert life, saw in Elijah's fight a reflection of their own struggles against external forces and governmental overreach. They recognized his profound, unspoken connection to the land and its creatures. Some hailed him as a quiet hero, a man whose simple act of compassion had brought an unprecedented spotlight onto their remote corner of New Mexico. Others, particularly those with a deeper understanding of the ecological balance, began advocating passionately for Spirit's eventual release back into a protected wild habitat, believing that true preservation meant freedom. This burgeoning community involvement provided Elijah with an unexpected yet deeply comforting sense of solidarity against the mounting pressures. Amidst the swirling currents of advice, demands, and legal threats, Elijah found himself wrestling with a profound moral dilemma. He had saved Spirit's life, nurturing the frail colt back from the brink of death. He harbored an undeniable possessiveness, born of sweat, worry, and a fierce, protective love. Yet, as Spirit's strength rebounded, its wild spirit, that untamed essence of the desert, became increasingly evident. Could he, in good conscience, keep such a creature confined, even within the expansive fences of his ranch? He saw the restless energy in its eyes, the innate desire for boundless horizons. The conflict churned within him, the primal urge to protect his ward versus the ethical imperative to acknowledge its natural right to freedom. These internal struggles often transported Elijah back to fragments of his own past. He'd lost much in his life, a young wife to an unforgiving illness, a drought-ravaged herd that decimated his father's legacy, and perhaps most significantly, a piece of his own open heart that had since become calloused and guarded. Spirit's vulnerability, its desperate fight for survival, had unknowingly reopened those old wounds, but also offered a chance for a different kind of healing. He recognized in Spirit's untamed spirit a reflection of his own independent, solitary nature, and the fear of being truly alone, a feeling that resonated deeply. This rescue wasn't just about a horse. It was about confronting his own unresolved grief and finding purpose in a life he thought had been defined by loss. As if the federal agents and well-meaning activists weren't enough, a new, more sinister element began to make its presence felt. Reports reached Elijah's ears of Dr. Alistair Thorne, a shadowy figure, an immensely wealthy collector known for his obsession with rare, exotic species. Thorne, through various intermediaries, started making increasingly lucrative and increasingly insistent offers for Spirit. His agents were slick, impeccably dressed, and possessed an unsettling air of entitlement. They spoke of acquisition and private conservancy, but their thinly veiled words carried the unmistakable scent of possessive dominion. Thorne quickly became the tangible antagonist, a clear and present danger to Spirit's future freedom, far more menacing than the bureaucratic entanglements. The offers soon morphed into something more menacing. Elijah began receiving veiled threats, anonymous calls suggesting that unforeseen accidents could befall his ranch, or even him, if he proved uncooperative. A rusty gate, previously secure, was found inexplicably open one morning. A strange vehicle was spotted idling on a distant ridgeline, its occupants observing the ranch through binoculars. These subtle but persistent intimidations only served to solidify Elijah's resolve. Every threat, every unsettling offer, every glint of avarice in the eyes of Thorne's representatives hammered home the undeniable truth. Spirit needed him, and he would not falter. The stakes were no longer just about a horse. They were about a fundamental fight for dignity, freedom, and the right of one man to protect a creature he had saved, regardless of its perceived value to others. The chilling encounter with the federal agents, their words echoing with bureaucratic finality, propelled Elijah into an unfamiliar and uncomfortable world of legal battles and urgent consultations. He had always been a man of action, of direct solutions wrought by hard work and common sense. Now he found himself seated across from Maria Sanchez, a local lawyer known for her fierce advocacy for environmental causes and, coincidentally, a passionate supporter of wild Mustang preservation. Her office, cluttered with legal texts and framed photographs of New Mexico's rugged landscapes, felt like a sanctuary from the sterile threats of federal policy. Maria listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing, as Elijah recounted the agent's visit, the forms, the veiled threats. She explained the intricacies of the Wild, Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act, the complexities of federal land management, and the often conflicting interests of various agencies and conservation groups. It was a dizzying array of information, but Maria's quiet confidence and strategic mind offered a glimmer of hope. She advised him on his rights, on the legal precedents, and on the critical importance of public opinion. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Spirit's transformation continued at an astonishing pace. The frail, starving colt Elijah had discovered was gone, replaced by a magnificent, spirited young Mustang. Its coat, once dull and matted, now gleamed with health, its muscles rippled beneath a vibrant bay hide. There was a coiled power in its movements, a primal elegance that spoke of generations of wild freedom. Spirit's eyes, once dulled by fear and starvation, now burned with an intelligent fire, mirroring the vast, untamed horizons from which it sprang. It would gallop across the small pasture, a blur of motion, then stop abruptly, nostrils flaring as it scented the wind, a living testament to resilience. Its wild spirit, initially a faint spark, had ignited into a roaring flame, constantly reminding Elijah of its true nature. This visible resurgence in spirit sparked a deepening emotional journey within Elijah. The cowboy, typically stoic and reserved, found himself observing the Mustang with an almost paternal tenderness. He began to recognize parallels between Spirit's struggle for survival and his own past wounds, the quiet battles he'd fought against loneliness and loss. Spirit's vulnerability, its desperate need for help, had unlocked something within Elijah, forcing him to confront his own emotional scars, to acknowledge the weight of years spent isolated and guarded. He saw in Spirit a reflection of his own yearning for freedom, for a place where he truly belonged, unburdened by past regrets. The Mustang was not just an animal he saved, it was a catalyst for his own healing. As word of Spirit's miraculous recovery and Elijah's legal predicament spread, public support began to swell. Maria had, with Elijah's hesitant permission, started a modest online campaign, sharing Spirit's story and the cowboy's unwavering commitment. Local newspapers ran features, and small grassroots organizations dedicated to Mustang welfare picked up the narrative. Spirit quickly became a symbol of resilience against impossible odds, a symbol of the vanishing wild, and a symbol of the power of individual compassion. Donations, small but heartfelt, started to trickle in, alongside messages of encouragement and offers of assistance. The tide of public opinion was slowly turning in Elijah's favor, portraying him not as an obstructionist, but as a devoted guardian. The growing public support, however, only seemed to fuel the desperation of those who wished to exploit or control Spirit. One moonless night, a subtle attempt to intimidate Elijah or steal Spirit occurred. A section of the ranch fence, far from the main house, was deliberately cut, and fresh tire tracks were found near the pasture gate. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear and chilling. Someone was watching, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. The stakes, already high, had just escalated, reinforcing Elijah's resolve to protect the magnificent creature at all costs. This was no longer just a legal fight. It was a battle for Spirit's life, and for Elijah's very way of life. The meetings with federal agents were a grueling dance between Elijah's steadfast pragmatism and their impenetrable bureaucratic lexicon. He sat across polished tables, a man accustomed to the raw honesty of the land, now facing individuals whose language felt as sterile and unforgiving as the desert itself. They spoke of resource allocation, biodiversity preservation, and asset relocation, terms that stripped Spirit of its living essence, reducing it to a mere statistic within a sprawling federal mandate. Elijah tried to inject humanity into their sterile discussions, recounting the colt's emaciated form, the raw struggle for life he had witnessed in its eyes, the careful, painstaking days of nursing it back from the brink. But his stories, steeped in empathy and personal connection, seemed to bounce off their professional detachment like pebbles against a granite cliff. They acknowledged his good intentions, even praised his efforts, yet always circled back to the unyielding letter of the law. They presented him with a series of options, each more unpalatable than the last. He could, they explained, surrender Spirit to a designated federal holding facility, where it would join other wild Mustangs awaiting adoption or placement in larger managed herds. Or perhaps, given its unique genetic profile, it could be transferred to a specialized breeding program, ensuring the continuation of its rare lineage under strict supervision. None of these choices resonated with the vision Elijah held for Spirit, a life lived freely, with the wind in its mane, not confined by fences or protocols. He envisioned sprawling plains, not regulated paddocks, true freedom, not managed existence. The federal agents, for their part, saw only logistical hurdles and legal precedents, unable or unwilling to truly grasp the profound spiritual connection that had blossomed between man and Mustang. Meanwhile, the collector, a shadowy figure known only through his relentless intermediaries and legal threats, intensified his campaign. Elijah's landline, normally reserved for vital ranch business, now rang incessantly with thinly veiled offers, each number progressively higher, transforming Spirit from a living creature into a grotesque bidding war. These weren't overt threats of violence, but rather insidious legal maneuvers, letters from high-powered law firms hinting at claims of unlawful possession and hindrance to conservation efforts. The antagonist's tactics were calculated to wear Elijah down, to exploit his isolation and his limited resources, to make him believe that surrendering Spirit was not just inevitable, but the most sensible, least painful path forward. Elijah felt the pressure mounting, a slow, relentless squeeze on his solitary existence. Yet, amidst this escalating external chaos, Spirit continued its astonishing transformation. The gangly, skeletal colt had blossomed into a creature of breathtaking power and grace. Its coat gleamed under the desert sun, its muscles rippled beneath a healthy hide, and its eyes, once clouded with fear and hunger, now blazed with an untamed intelligence. It would follow Elijah through the ranch, not out of dependency, but a curious trust, its movements fluid and confident, a living testament to resilience. Spirit's continued healing, its defiant flourishing despite the storm brewing around it, served as a constant, potent symbol of hope, a vibrant counterpoint to the sterile legal arguments and greedy machinations. This stark contrast solidified Elijah's resolve. Every bureaucratic meeting, every threatening letter, every sleepless night spent contemplating Spirit's fate only hardened his determination. He looked at the magnificent young Mustang, now almost unrecognizable from the pathetic creature he'd found, and knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he could not betray its trust. He had saved its life once. He would fight for its freedom now, even if it meant sacrificing his own peace, even if it meant facing down the full, formidable weight of federal law and private greed. Spirit deserved more than a managed existence. It deserved true freedom, and Elijah, the weathered cowboy, felt an undeniable obligation to secure it, no matter the cost. Elijah's solitude, so long a defining feature of his existence, began to crack under the relentless pressure. Yet, within those fissures, something unexpected began to emerge. News of his stand for Spirit, of the lone cowboy defying federal agencies and wealthy collectors, had permeated beyond the immediate ranching community. Suddenly, the phone rang with different voices, not just the incessant threats from the collector's lawyers, but calls from other ranchers, weathered men and women who understood the land and held a quiet reverence for its wild inhabitants. They offered advice, shared stories of government overreach, and some even cautiously offered to stand with him, their steadfast, sun-baked voices a balm against the storm. Local activists, drawn by Spirit's plight and Elijah's unexpected heroism, also reached out, proposing strategies, connecting him with sympathetic journalists, and organizing petitions. Even within the federal system, whispers of discontent reached Elijah's ears. A low-level agent, disheartened by the bureaucratic maneuvering, discreetly provided crucial information about the specific designation of Spirit's ancestral herd, a detail that could potentially redefine the legal battleground. These unexpected allies, a diverse coalition of practical landowners and passionate advocates, were a lifeline, providing not just tactical support, but a profound sense of not being entirely alone in this fight. The growing public sentiment culminated in a town meeting, an event unprecedented in its scale and fervor for this sleepy desert community. The local hall, usually reserved for sparse county elections, was packed to overflowing. Farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, and even curious tourists listened intently as Elijah, unaccustomed to public speaking, nonetheless spoke from the heart about spirit, about the land, and about the fundamental right to freedom. The sentiment was overwhelming. Spirit belonged either with Elijah, who had literally brought it back from the brink, or back in its natural habitat, but certainly not in the sterile clutches of a private collection or a soulless government facility. The community's united voice was a powerful testament to the moral imperative at play, transforming the dispute from a niche legal battle into a widely recognized fight for local values and wild heritage. Amidst this groundswell of support, a crucial piece of evidence surfaced thanks to the diligent research of a retired local historian who had heard Elijah's story. Digging through dusty archives, this historian uncovered forgotten documents dating back over a century, detailing a specific land grant that inadvertently encompassed a migratory path historically used by Spirit's unique Mustang lineage. More importantly, it included a long dormant clause granting limited, conditional protection to native desert fauna within its boundaries, implicitly extending to wild horses. This historical precedent, if validated, could significantly strengthen Elijah's case, suggesting an inherent right for Spirit to remain within a designated wild zone, a finding that the federal agencies had either overlooked or deliberately ignored. It was a potential game-changer. The ordeal, despite its immense stress, was also a crucible for Elijah's own personal growth. The guarded, stoic exterior he had maintained for decades began to soften. In defending Spirit, he was implicitly defending his own connection to the wild, his own deeply held principles. The shared struggle fostered a new kind of connection with people, a depth of communication he hadn't experienced in years. He found himself articulating his emotions, his fears, his hopes, not just to Spirit, but to the burgeoning network of allies. The fight forced him to confront not just external adversaries, but his own internal barriers, shedding some of his emotional guardedness and finding a profound and unexpected sense of purpose in the collective struggle. However, the antagonist, clearly sensing his carefully constructed legal and social pressures beginning to crumble, made a desperate, bold move. A discreet investigator, posing as a documentary filmmaker, had been gathering intelligence around the ranch for weeks. One moonless night, under the cover of a mounting dust storm, a team hired by the collector attempted to raid the ranch, aiming to swiftly seize Spirit and disappear into the vast, unforgiving desert, forcing a definitive, terrifying confrontation. The confrontation arrived not in a courtroom, as some might have expected, but with the stealthy whisper of tires on the distant dirt road one moonless night. Elijah, a man whose senses were honed by decades of desert living, felt an unfamiliar tremor in the air, a subtle shift in the nocturnal quiet that prickled his skin. He was already awake, a restless disquiet having kept him from his bed, a premonition of the darkness that now approached. The collector, desperate and emboldened by the perceived weakness of a lone rancher, had decided to forego legal niceties entirely. A shadowy vehicle, its lights extinguished, crept towards the ranch, intent on seizing Spirit under the cloak of night. Elijah, however, was not easily outwitted. His ranch was not just a collection of buildings. It was an extension of himself, his home, his sanctuary, and now, Spirit's. He knew every creak of the old barn, every loose stone in the corral fence, every shadow cast by the mesquite trees. He had spent the last few weeks preparing, not for a legal battle, but for a physical one, anticipating precisely this kind of brazen attempt. His cunning lay not in elaborate traps, but in his intimate understanding of his surroundings and his adversaries' likely assumptions. They would expect a sleeping rancher, an easy target. They would not expect the desert to fight back. As the figures, barely discernible in the faint starlight, began to disembark, moving with a practiced, predatory quiet toward Spirit's paddock, Elijah unleashed his first, most trusted ally. A sudden, piercing shriek from the depths of the canyon, amplified by the still night air, echoed across the land. It wasn't a human sound, but the wild, unnerving cry of a coyote, deliberately provoked and strategically positioned. The crude alarm sent a jolt through the intruders, momentarily disorienting them. Then, from the adjacent darkened corrals, a flurry of hoofbeats erupted. Not Spirit, but Elijah's working horses, expertly stampeded by the cowboy himself, creating a cacophony of sound and dust that further confused the would-be thieves. Spirit, meanwhile, played its own magnificent role in its defense. Now a powerful, spirited yearling, attuned to Elijah's presence and sensing the danger, it mirrored his wild instincts. As the intruders finally pushed through a section of fence Elijah had intentionally left seemingly weak, Spirit, with a snort of defiance, bolted. But it didn't bolt randomly into the open desert. It weaved through the very obstacles Elijah had subtly laid out. Hidden tripwires of old rope, strategically placed barrels that toppled with deafening clatter, areas of soft sand designed to impede rapid movement. The Mustang moved with an almost supernatural grace, its lithe body effortlessly navigating the chaos, turning the ranch into a labyrinth of disruption for its pursuers. Just as the situation teetered on the brink, with the collector's men closing in on Spirit, the desert itself seemed to rise up. Headlights, not from federal vehicles, but from a collection of pickup trucks and battered SUVs, suddenly pierced the darkness from various directions. The local community, ever watchful, had rallied. Word of the collector's escalating threats had reached them, and they understood Elijah's fight was their fight, safeguarding the wild spirit of their land. Ranchers, their faces grim and determined, emerged from their vehicles, some carrying rifles, others simply standing as a formidable, silent wall. Their unexpected arrival turned the tide completely. The collector's men, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, realizing their covert operation was now exposed, scrambled back to their vehicle and retreated into the night, their tails metaphorically between their legs. The immediate danger for Spirit was averted, a moral victory secured, and a temporary reprieve finally granted. The quiet of the ranch, usually punctuated only by the wind and the distant lowing of cattle, was now filled with an unsettling silence, following the intense struggle. Elijah stood by the rough-hewn fence, watching Spirit graze peacefully in the corral. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a profound exhaustion that settled deep in his bones. The attempted raid, the desperate chase across his property, and the dramatic intervention by his unexpected allies felt less like a memory and more like a fever dream now. Yet the scattered hoofprints in the dust and the lingering scent of fear in the air were stark reminders of the night's harrowing events. He watched Spirit, its coat shimmering under the rising sun, a magnificent embodiment of wild beauty. A deep sigh escaped him, a sound laden with relief, but also with the heavy weight of what still lay ahead. He moved closer, leaning against the weathered wood of the fence, the splinters digging faintly into his palm. Spirit lifted its head, ears swiveling slightly towards him, before resuming its calm grazing. In that simple, trusting gesture, Elijah felt the full depth of their connection. This wasn't merely an animal he had rescued. This creature had become an undeniable part of him, a mirror reflecting his own untamed spirit, his own fight for survival and authenticity. For too long, he had allowed the harsh realities of the desert and the solitary demands of ranching to define him, to keep him isolated. Spirit had broken through that barrier, forcing him to confront not only external threats, but also the quiet wilderness within himself. He understood now, with absolute clarity, that his fight for Spirit's freedom was, in many ways, a battle for his own soul. Just as Elijah contemplated the relentless pressure and the uncertain future, a new, viable solution for Spirit's future began to emerge. It wasn't through a formal declaration, but a quiet conversation, initiated unexpectedly by Maria, the young federal agent who had, against all odds, shown unwavering integrity and a genuine care for Spirit's welfare during the confrontation. She approached him the next morning, not with stern directives, but with a proposal. Her agency, she explained, had recently acquired access to a vast, untouched tract of federal land bordering a known MUSTANG territory. It was remote, protected, and crucially, offered the potential for Spirit to integrate into an existing wild herd, allowing it to live as it was truly meant to. This wasn't a managed park or a fenced sanctuary in the traditional sense, but a return to the true wild, with minimal human intervention. This proposal marked the beginning of a surprising collaboration between Elijah and the federal agencies. Maria, impressed by Elijah's knowledge of the land, his deep understanding of equine behavior, and his undeniable bond with Spirit, recognized his unique value. She understood that forcing Spirit into a completely alien environment or a strictly controlled breeding program would be detrimental. Instead, she advocated for Elijah's continued involvement, recognizing him not as a hindrance, but as an invaluable asset. He was the one who knew Spirit. He was the one who had earned its trust. Together, they began initiating discussions and plans for Spirit's future. The process would be delicate, involving gradual acclimatization to the new territory, careful monitoring, and a strategy to introduce Spirit to a compatible wild herd. It was a monumental undertaking, but for the first time since Spirit's discovery, Elijah felt a flicker of hope that true freedom was within reach. The wild, untamed Mustang, saved from the brink of death, was finally on the path to reclaiming its rightful place, and Elijah, the weathered cowboy, would be there to ensure its journey was safe. The day had arrived, cloaked in the crisp desert air that still carried the scent of sagebrush and distant storms. It was the emotional moment when Elijah prepared Spirit for its next phase of life, a transition that felt both like a farewell and a profound new beginning. He stood by the corral, watching the young Mustang, now fully recovered, a picture of vibrant health and boundless energy. Spirit's coat, once dull and matted, gleamed under the rising sun, its muscles rippling with an innate power that had been dormant for too long. The Mustang embodied the strength and beauty of its lineage, its eyes holding a wild intelligence that had grown more pronounced with every passing day. It was ready for this transition, ready to run free. Elijah had come to terms with the profound truth that true love often meant letting go, especially when it was for the greater good of another being. His emotional journey, scarred by past losses and a life of solitary endurance, had reached a point of acceptance, a quiet peace he hadn't known in decades. The initial wrenching pain of separation was tempered by the overwhelming joy of knowing he had given Spirit a second chance at its natural destiny. He had saved not just a creature, but a piece of the wild, and in doing so, had healed a part of himself. The local community, who had rallied around them through every challenge, gathered for a respectful and heartfelt send-off. There were no grand speeches, no overtly boisterous celebrations, but a quiet, collective acknowledgement of Elijah's courage and Spirit's symbolic importance. Ranch hands, neighbors, and even some of the federal agents who had initially been adversaries now stood side by side, sharing cups of coffee and murmuring words of encouragement. Old Man Hemlock, his face weathered like ancient canyons, clapped Elijah on the shoulder. "You done good, son, real good." It was high praise from a man of few words, and Elijah felt it resonate deep within him. Maria, the federal agent, offered a small, sincere smile. "He'll remember you," she said, her voice soft but certain. The journey to freedom was meticulously planned, emphasizing the utmost care and respect for the rare animal. A specially designed, spacious trailer, equipped with cameras and temperature control, was backed up to the corral. Elijah walked Spirit into it himself, speaking in low, comforting tones, his hand resting on the Mustang's neck. Spirit, usually wary of confined spaces, seemed to sense the significance of the moment, entering with a surprising calmness. The destination was a vast, protected federal land adjoining an established Mustang territory hundreds of miles away, carefully chosen for its pristine conditions and suitable environment for wild horses. Elijah, accompanied by Maria and a small team of wildlife experts, would personally oversee the release. As the trailer pulled away, kicking up a plume of dust against the vast New Mexico landscape, Elijah watched until it was a distant speck. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the desert once again settling around him. But it was a different kind of silence now, one filled not with solitude, but with the echo of hoofbeats galloping towards freedom and the quiet satisfaction of a purpose fulfilled. He knew this wasn't the end, but merely the exciting preamble to Spirit's true story, a story he had helped write. The Mustang was going home. Spirit's journey to this new, expansive realm was meticulously planned, a testament to the collaborative effort born from the crucible of adversity. The federal land, a sprawling tapestry of sun-drenched mesas, winding canyons, and hidden springs, stretched for hundreds of square miles, truly vast and untamed. It was a place where the wind sculpted the earth, and the silence was broken only by the cries of hawks circling overhead. Upon its guarded release, Spirit, now a magnificent yearling, paused at the edge of the transport trailer, its dark eyes wide, taking in the scent of freedom. Then, with a joyful snort, it exploded into the landscape, a blur of muscle and mane galloping across the sagebrush-dotted plains. Visuals captured by motion-activated cameras placed discreetly by Maria's team showed Spirit not just surviving, but thriving. It learned the new water sources, found shelter in the natural alcoves, and, most importantly, gradually integrated into a small, established band of mustangs. Seeing Spirit nuzzle another mare, or playfully nip at a young colt, brought a profound, quiet satisfaction to Elijah. The lonely, starving creature he found was now home, a wild testament to resilience, a vibrant thread in the ancient fabric of the desert. Elijah's ranch life, though outwardly unchanged, now pulsed with a different, deeper meaning. He was still the solitary cowboy, overseeing his small herd of cattle, mending fences, and battling the elements. But the quietude held a new resonance. The vastness of the New Mexico sky, once a reflection of his own isolation, now felt like a boundless canvas for possibility. He'd gaze out at the distant mountains, knowing Spirit was out there, living free, and that knowledge infused his daily chores with a renewed purpose. He rode his horse with a lighter heart, the dust settling not as a symbol of weariness, but of a journey undertaken and a victory won. He was still a cowboy, undeniably, but he was also a guardian of wildness, a silent advocate for the untamed spirit that mirrored his own. The connection to the land had always been fundamental, but now it was sanctified by Spirit's story, a testament to the symbiotic relationship between man and nature. The story of Elijah and Spirit, like the desert wind carrying whispers across the plains, became a local legend. It was told in hushed tones around campfires, recounted over coffee in the nearest dusty diner, and even made its way into regional newspapers. It wasn't just a tale of a cowboy saving a horse. It was a testament to unexpected compassion, to battling overwhelming odds, and to the profound power of one individual's unwavering will. Spirit, the rare Mustang, became a symbol not just of its endangered lineage, but of the fierce, unyielding spirit of the American West itself. Its survival, against all expectation, resonated deeply with people who understood the harsh realities of life and the immense value of every small victory. The tale became a modern-day fable, reminding everyone that heroism often wears a weathered hat and speaks in few words. Through the crucible of Spirit's rescue and the subsequent fight for its freedom, Elijah unexpectedly found a way to address his own long-held, unspoken wounds. The loss, the regret, the quiet bitterness that had settled deep within him like desert dust began to recede. Spirit, in its vulnerability and its fierce will to live, had become a conduit for Elijah's own healing. By fighting for Spirit's right to exist, he had, in essence, fought for his own, reclaiming a sense of purpose and connection that had been lost for years. He learned to trust again, to allow allies like Maria into his guarded world, and to recognize the inherent goodness in people, even those who initially represented the bureaucratic systems he so deeply mistrusted. He found peace not in solitude, but in the knowledge that he had made a difference, that his life had intersected with another's in a way that truly mattered. Spirit's survival and subsequent freedom stood as a powerful living symbol of hope. It was a beacon for conservation, a living embodiment of the enduring spirit of the wild, and a poignant reminder of the transformative power of human kindness. In a world often consumed by cynicism and conflict, The story of Elijah and Spirit offered a glimmer of light, a testament to the profound connection that can form between species, and the extraordinary lengths to which one person can go to protect something sacred. It proved that even in the vast, unforgiving expanses of the desert, compassion could bloom, and a single act of rescue could echo far beyond its initial reach. The intricate plans for Spirit's release progressed with a surprising efficiency, a testament to Maria's dedication and Elijah's quiet resolve. They spent weeks preparing, not just the physical logistics of transportation to the vast federal lands, but also mentally steeling themselves for the inevitable parting. Spirit, now a picture of vibrant health, its coat gleaming under the desert sun, seemed to sense the change in the air. Its wild instincts, once dulled by starvation, had reawakened, manifesting in playful bucks and a newfound restless energy that spoke of an innate yearning for the boundless freedom of its ancestors. It was ready. The day of departure arrived, bright and clear, yet heavy with unspoken emotion. Elijah led Spirit, not into a trailer, but slowly, deliberately, towards the edge of his ranch property, where a small, carefully chosen group of federal agents and wildlife specialists waited. There were no gawkers, no media, only those who truly understood the gravity of the moment. Maria stood beside him, her expression a mix of triumph and quiet sadness. The journey to the remote federal land, a sprawling reserve bordering a known wild Mustang territory, was meticulous. Spirit was accompanied by a small, calm mare and a gelding, both carefully selected to ease its transition into a larger herd, guiding it gently towards its destiny. As Elijah watched Spirit disappear over the distant ridge, merging seamlessly with the vast expanse of the high desert, a profound sense of peace settled over him. It wasn't the bittersweet ache of loss, but the quiet satisfaction of a purpose fulfilled. Spirit was home, thriving, and would undoubtedly contribute to the preservation of its rare lineage, watched over not just by the indifferent forces of nature, but by dedicated human advocates like Maria and those like her. Elijah's personal journey had indeed reached a satisfying conclusion, characterized by an unexpected inner peace and a renewed sense of purpose. He was still the cowboy of the New Mexico desert, but he was also something more. The narrative of Elijah and Spirit became more than just a local legend. It resonated far beyond the dust-swept plains, a powerful testament to the profound impact one small act of compassion can profoundly have. It echoed the timeless theme that saving a life, particularly one so vulnerable and yet so symbolic of untamed beauty, can, in turn, save a soul. Elijah, once a man defined by his solitude and the practicalities of survival, had found a deeper connection to the world, to himself, and to the wild spirit that resided within all living things. His quiet act had sparked a chain reaction, revealing the resilience of nature and the enduring power of human kindness. The story ends not with a grand pronouncement, but with the subtle rustle of wind through sagebrush, the distant call of a wild horse, and the undeniable sense that some connections, once forged, live on, shaping the landscape of both heart and land. It was a story of connection, resilience, and the wild beauty of nature, woven into the very fabric of the desert. If you've been moved by this incredible tale of survival, true grit, and unexpected kinship, please take a moment to subscribe. Join our community for more stories that inspire, connect us to the magnificent world around us, and remind us of the profound courage found in both humans and animals.